Alright, what's going on, guys? This is your host, Arctic Ghost, and welcome back to another episode of the Arctic Pauper Show. This time, we are going to be looking at Mono Blue Delver, or Delver Blue, as most of everyone in Pauper knows as what it's called. What is Delver Blue? Delver Blue is basically a Mono Blue aggro tempo deck. You win the game with Delver Secrets or some random 1/1s, this 2/2 that draws cards, and this big 2/4 guy. And then you control the game and the tempo with Counterspell, Spellstar Sprites, a Counterspell. You got Daze, you have Snaps and Vapor Snags, lose a little life and whatnot. What makes this deck so strong? Well, if you notice, you only play 17 lands. And the rest of your deck is spells and creatures, and every card that you draw is either a good creature, a counterspell, a card that draws cards, or a bounce spell. So every single card that you draw is built to either help your creatures win the game by clearing the board, or by stopping your opponent from doing what they want to do. Why is this deck so strong, you may ask? Well, the big part about it is, first of all, counterspells are obviously very strong in the game of Magic the Gathering. Counterspells stop your opponent from doing everything that everything that they want to do, because the spells don't even resolve. The other thing about this deck is you only need 3 or 4 lands to function. And since you play 17 lands and you play 10 more of these. Since you play more than 10 cards that draw cards, and you only play 17 lands, the odds of you drawing more spells than lands are so high compared to most other decks in the format. That's the beauty of it. Since you only have to play 17 lands, I would say 8 out of 10 times you're going to be drawing a spell rather than a land. That's what makes this deck so good. Also, is that it tends to never run out of gas unless you're having a bad draw or just a bad luck day. And that can be very, very hard for any deck in the format to deal with, because drawing constant gas upon good cards is just so miserable for every other deck, because you run them out of cards way faster than you run out of cards. But instead of me going on and repeating myself, let's just break this deck down piece by piece. We'll get into it, and then that'll be that. So first up, you have the creatures. First up are the creature that is the creature that makes the deck what the deck is, Delver of Secrets. Now, at first glance, this guy doesn't look very good. It's just a 1-mana 1/1. But if you do happen to flip a spell on the top of your deck, by spell I mean a non-creature, non-land card, so instant or sorcery, it flips into a 3/2 flyer. Now, a 3/2 flyer may not be all that good to you. It dies to literally everything under the sun. But the problem is, you have tons of spells to protect it. You have Mutagenic Growth, you have Vapor Snag to replay it, you have Snap to replay it, you have a bunch of counter spells, you even have Bone Splitter to help pump it into a 5/2 to put your opponent on a turn 4 clock. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've won games by Delver itself, and I'm sure you've lost many games by Delver itself, especially if you're watching this video. You probably know what this deck does. So Delver Secrets, probably the best creature in the deck. Next is Spire Golem and Ninja. That's Spellstar Sprite. Even this guy's really good. Anyway, on to Fairy Miscreant. This is what replaced Cloud of Fairies. It's not really that great, but the fact that it's a 1-mana fairy to make Spellstar Sprite basically counterspell in this format, since almost every good spell is going to cost 2 or 1. Fairy Miscreant also replaces itself for the second, third, and fourth copy you play, as long as you already have a Fairy Miscreant in play. It also flies, which of course is, again, really, really good because you have the Bone Splitter in the deck. It's not the greatest creature in the world, it's true, but it does fill its role pretty well. Next up, you have Spellstar Sprite, which I personally hate and wish would be banned, because it's a counterspell and it's a good 1/1 flyer, which makes it a good blocker. And with Ninja, the Deep Hours, and Snap, you can just have so many shenanigans going on. It's so stupid. This card is just, it's so good. I can't even really, I can't really put it into many words how good this card is. Then you have Ninja, the Deep Hours. Arguably, this card is not the absolute best when you're casting it for 4 mana, but when you're using its ninjutsu ability, it's insane. Why? Because it draws you a card every time it clocks in. You can return a Fairy Miscreant to replay it if you have another one to play to draw another card. You can return Spellsorcerer Sprite, arguably is the best case scenario, so that you can get a Counterspell back and draw a card. The best part about this is, if you go to the declare blocker step, and you're in the before damage phase of the game, as most of you would know it as, when you play spells before damage actually happens. If your opponent was to target, say, your Spellsorcerer Sprite, now this is after declare attackers, this is before damage is going through in the blocker step. Let's say they target this with a lightning bolt. You can actually ninjutsu in response and return the Spellsorcerer Sprite back to your hand, which is pretty cool. You can also keep ninjutsuing Ninja of the Deep Hours into Ninja of the Deep Hours into Ninja of the Deep Hours, which is also pretty funny, but that rarely ever comes up in a good way. And then you have Spire Golem. Spire Golem is just great. It blocks almost everything. It doesn't die to a lot of things. It's a 2/4 flyer that comes down on turn 3, and as the game goes on, the more lands you play, it can cost up to 0 mana, which is pretty insane when you think about it with Ninja of the Deep Hours and Snap. Moving on to the draw spells, you have 4 Ponder and 4 Preordain. I do not play Brainstorm because I don't believe Brainstorm is very good in this deck. I don't like playing Brainstorm typically without fetch lands, or any type of shuffle effect. I have kind of the same mindset as most of the quote pro end quote players in Magic, who usually say, Brainstorms aren't really that good because you don't have fetch lands. Well, it's true, because let's say you go Brainstorm, right? Sure. Let's say you get Vapor Snag and 2 islands, which happens more often than you may think. Well, the problem with that is now you're sifting through 2 islands, is where with Ponder and Preordain, you could simply just, blind flip the Delver and then put more cards to the bottom, or Ponder helps flip Delver Secrets just as good as Brainstorm does, just not as instant speed. That's why I don't play Brainstorm. You can play Brainstorm. I have no problem with people playing Brainstorm. I understand why people play Brainstorm. Flipping Delver is a very big key part to the deck. I guess I have a different kind of way of outlooking on Delver than playing Brainstorm. There's a lot of people who do play Brainstorm. There's a lot of people who don't play Brainstorm. So, is what it is. Then you have Vapor Snag, is what I'll talk about next. Vapor Snag is sometimes you can get your opponent to 1 life, or you need a 1 mana bounce spell, and Vapor Snag is just better than Unsummon. A lot of people have been cutting some snaps from the deck. I decided to do the same. The 1 life has actually made a difference before, so I decided to keep it in. Snap is kind of different. Snap is really used for Spellsorcerer Sprite so that you can bounce it back and play it to counter a spell. It's also pretty good to just bounce a creature and then be able to counter it, things like that. It's not that good, but it's good enough that you want a couple of them to act as Spellsorcerer Sprite number 5 and 6. And then Daze. I don't play 3 Days because with Daze I really only want to see one within the first 3 turns, and then I never want to see the other one. As where with the other Days, with having a 3rd Daze, I still want to see it within the first 3 turns, but I don't want to see it, I don't want to see it 5 turns later where it's pretty irrelevant. And then, I still have 1 more left in my deck. Then you have Counterspell. I shouldn't have to talk about this card. You already know why it's here. Then you have a Deprive to act as a 5th Counterspell. It's pretty good, even if you have to return a land. The best part about this deck also that I did not mention, look at how cheap all of the spells in the deck are. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Basically free, basically free, basically free, basically free. 2, 2, 2, 2. At the most 3, or basically free. 1. None of your spells cost more than really 3 mana, and 1, 2, 3, 4, technically 5 spells in your deck are basically free to cast. That's also what makes this deck so good, is that not only does it draw a ton of cards, you can play a ton of spells in 1 turn, which is just overwhelming for a deck that has to rely on their mana as a resource and can only cast, 1 or 2 spells a turn. There you go. Where was I? I was on Deprive. Gush. Gush is not great because you have to return 2 lands. You're already, you're usually bottlenecked on lands as it is. But the fact you get to draw 2 cards, and like I said, all your spells cost very, very cheap. And you do get to float mana when you Gush because you don't actually have to return tapped lands. It's pretty good. It's pretty good for a card that draws cards. I have a 1 of Mutagenic Growth that I've been trying out for a long time. It's, just a good protection from Lightning Bolt on a Flip Delver. It's a good protection from Lightning Bolt on a Ninja. It's good protection from Flame Slash on a Spire Golem and things of that sort. And then a 1 of Bone Splitter to help up the clock because most of your creatures are 1/1s and only 2 power, so you do want to finish the game early. So that's the main deck. I'm pretty much as close to the stock list that everybody runs as I could be. I do run 1 Mutagenic Growth, but everybody always innovates with their decks and Pauper. That's what makes Pauper great. As far as the sideboard goes, you have 2 Annul against the Affinity matchup, because the Affinity matchup can be pretty hairy, as well as the Boggles matchup. 3 Dispel against any type of blue deck. 2 Curse of Chains is 2 extra removal spells against any creature deck. Serrated Arrows against Elves and the Mirror and anything of the sort. 3 Stormbound Guys to have extra win conditions in the Mirror, or to have a good game against the Chainer's Edict decks. And then you finish it off with Hydroblast against the red decks, and also good against Affinity to defeat a Tog and or Fling and Galvanic Blast. It's better than Dispel because Hydroblast deals with the Tog, so never bring in Dispel against Affinity unless they're playing some kind of weird spell Affinity deck. So, you might be asking yourself, well, what decks beat this deck? Well, the problem is that, in my opinion, Delver actually doesn't really have any bad matchups in the format, unless you're taking a deck that Deluxikov built. Usually any deck that he builds beats Delver, but that's neither here nor there, and I digress. Elves has been known to be a pretty hairy matchup, because they can usually just play so many spells in one turn faster than you can counter. Goblins is not the greatest matchup, because they can be faster than you. Boggles is hit or miss. And then, of course, there's Stompy. Stompy is also renowned to be one of Delver's just biggest nightmare matchups. Other than that, Delver is consistently usually one of, if not the best deck in the format every single rotation. So, by rotation, I mean every single time a new set is printed. So that's the deck. Thanks for watching so much, and I'm going to play a couple test matches with it. Let's see how it goes, and I'll be right back. Thanks for watching.